Daisies blooming, sundress swaying in the breeze. I can't stop staring. You've put a spell on me, and I hope that you never decide to.
Bobby, my younger brother, has been making moonshine for 35 years, way before my kids were ever born. He got so good at it, he started adding flavors into it, becoming famous around the area for his grape-infused moonshine. But one night, he tells me he needs help up in the woods. You see, for the first time ever, I realized that Bobby was afraid to go in the woods. Now let me explain something to you about my brother. That man has been in the woods his whole life. In fact, my entire family has been in the woods our whole entire lives. So for Bobby to come to me and ask me to help him go into the woods to get his distilling equipment, I knew there was a problem. I just wasn't sure exactly what it was. And as I begin to tell you my family stories, I need you to understand, over 46 years of Dogman Encounters started with Bobby. And I found out about it right there at my kitchen table. And at that time when Bobby was sharing this story with me, it was absolutely terrifying. But I had no clue about the events that would continuously unfold on my property, which made Bobby's initial encounter seem like a kid's fairy tale. He's sitting at the table, drinking coffee, and he says, "Well, you know how far back up in the woods I go when I go to do what I do, right?" He explains to me that he was up there one morning, had the stills going. He's sitting back against a tree, just thinking about life and how he wanted more for himself, a better house, a better car. And he begins the process of daydreaming about a better life, staring off into the woods. And you know the stare I'm talking about, that middle stare, where you're looking off into the distance, but you're not seeing what's there in the distance. You're staring off into this middle ground, just completely zoned out. It was right then in the process of him daydreaming that he saw movement and realized that something was staring back at him. And according to my brother, at first he couldn't believe his eyes because it was a fox, a giant red fox. But it looked like some kind of freaky science fiction movie mutant standing on two legs next to a tree. Now, he didn't know how long it had been watching him because it blended in damn near perfectly with the foliage around it. And just as my brother is getting to this point in the story, my wife moseys into the kitchen to get a cup of coffee. Understand, she's been in the other room, eavesdropping on the conversation, and says, "Baby, go help your brother get his stuff out of the woods. There's no reason for him to have to come up with wild, outlandish stories to get you off your ass, to get you to go help him do what needs to be done." But sitting there looking into my brother's eyes, I realized that he was afraid. And again, it's important that you completely understand that my family is an outdoors family. Always has been, always will be. So for me to sit there and look into my brother's eyes and see fear in his eyes from something that he encountered in the woods on our property, no, that wasn't right. And regardless as to whether my wife believed him or not, I knew deep down in my gut that something was wrong. He goes on to finish his story, explaining to me why he left all of his equipment in the woods. According to him, this thing shadowed him all the way out of the woods to the house on the front side of our property. Never getting too close. Never did anything aggressive. It just followed him. That day, my brother pleaded with me to go with him to the back end of our property to get his stuff. So 2 days later, we're off into the woods on the north side of our property. Now, most of the times when you think about a piece of property, you think about flat land or hilly land. One set of terrain, 2,942 acres, 4.5 square miles. And in that 4.5 square miles, not only do we have hollows and hills, we have wetlands. And there are portions that are so wet that water comes knee high. And if you're out there when it's storming or it's raining, that same water will rise to be waist deep. On the other side of that is this hill that drops down into this steep hollow. Once you get down into that hollow, there's a creek bed that runs through there. And Bobby uses that creek as his water source when he's making his moonshine. So now the two of us are down in that hollow gathering his equipment. Years ago, we had discussed cutting a road back into that area, but it would cost way too much money. Imagine the scene. The two of us are down in this hollow. Everything is normal for about 10 to 15 minutes. Then the woods go quiet. And what I mean by quiet is there's no birds chirping, the squirrels aren't moving around. It's just dead silent. Then we hear this screeching and screaming sound. It's far off, but it's crisp and clear as that sound bounces and echoes around in the hollow. When I ask Bobby about it, he says it's his first time hearing that sound. But to him, it wasn't normal either. Now listen, I'm a man that lives off the land, have my entire life, and I've never heard a scream like that before. It sounded human but had these undertones that were animalistic and savage. About an hour later, we've made multiple trips and we've taken all of his equipment out of the woods, and everything is fine. Now, over the years on my property, there have been what I call pivotal points in my family's relationship with these animals. Incidents that, looking back on them now, changed the way we all interacted with these dogmen forever. The very first crucial moment like this happened when Fitz came to stay with us for a few weeks. You see, at this time I had a trailer home just off the roadway near the back of the property. Fitz, my buddy from the army, had a wandering eye. The kind of guy that when you went to a bar with him, if it weren't for his body physically being in your presence, you wouldn't have even known that he was there. The way his eyes darted back and forth around the room, looking at every woman who passed by. The problem for Fitz was his wife Ida, a 6-foot tall, beautiful woman whose eyes were the same shade as the whiskey he left in the bottom of his glass. And Ida was not fond of his wandering eye. And even though all he did was look, Fitz still stayed in a world of trouble. You see, the two of them had one of their annual dust-ups because of Fitz's behavior, and he was staying at our property in the trailer while Ida calmed down. She went upside Fitz's head with a pot, tried to stab him in the stomach with a butter knife. The sheriff gets called out, which is one of our friends, and instead of taking her to jail, he decides to tell the two of them to take a little break because every year they have these dust-ups. It's a Saturday morning, 6:30 a.m., my wife is cooking breakfast. I'm sitting in the kitchen talking to her about getting some hogs for the property when we start to hear gunshots. Now look, it's deer all over this property out here, so hearing one gunshot is not a problem. At first, we figured it was either one of our kids or one of our neighbors taking one of these deers down. But then you hear rapid gunfire, 7 shots in a row. My wife and I are looking at each other like, what the hell is going on now? I scramble out of the front door trying to figure out where these shots are coming from, and no sooner than I'm outside I see Fitz barreling up the road to my house in his car. He comes to a sliding stop inches from hitting my truck, hops out of his car with his rifle, not saying a word, lays the rifle over the trunk of his car and starts to take aim back down the road. So I'm there asking Fitz what the hell is he shooting at, but get no reply. I knew he had been drinking the night before because you can smell the whiskey oozing out of his pores. Have you ever found yourself at the point in a relationship with a friend where you're like, okay, I done did everything I can do to help you, but I done had enough of your bull? Well, that's where I am with Fitz in this moment. And I say to him, Fitz, what the hell are you shooting at? His reply, just wait, you'll see. So now we're both by the trunk of his car, and a few seconds later, I see Big Red leaping and bounding across the road. It stops for a brief second, looking in our direction, then takes off into the woods. And when Fitz finally turns around, I can see tears welling up in his eyes. Normally, his military buzz cut is sharp and pointy to the touch, but it's all laid down and discombobulated. And that's when he tells me something that he figured I didn't know about. He says, "Mister, you got monsters over here on your land." Starts to walk towards the front door of the house. Understand, the only thing that Fitz has on is a white tank top, boots, and boxer shorts. Now, inside of our house, in the kitchen, he calls Ida and starts apologizing to her, begging for her to allow him to come back home. Then, he tells us what happened. You see, that Friday night, he had been smoking and drinking. Goes outside, sits on a step to the trailer, immersed in his thoughts with a bottle of whiskey and a pack of cigarettes. According to Fitz, he had been sitting out there a solid 30 minutes on this emotional roller coaster, trying to figure out why he behaved the way he behaved. Thinking, wanting, yearning to be at home with Ida. And that's when he started to hear something moving around in the trees. But the movement was odd. It seemed like something too big was up, limbs cracking and shaking. So Fitz goes back inside, gets his flashlight, and does some investigating. Now pause right here in the story for a moment before I explain to you what happens next. I tried to tell Fitz, before I let him stay on the property, that we had some weird stuff going on. But you can't just tell a person you got werewolves on your property. Word was spread around town and everybody would think we were crazy. So I was just hoping and praying that for the time that Fitz was on our property, things will be fine. Everything will be quiet. Besides, at this point in time, it was late October and the previous year. By October, they had migrated through and we didn't have any more problems. So when I allowed Fitz to stay on my property, I anticipated that everything was going to be quiet and we wouldn't have any problems. Anyway, moving forward, Fitz is now outside with the flashlight. He's working his way up the backside of the hill with the trees that's right next to the road, just looking around. And that's when he gets a glimpse of Big Red held up in a tree. The sight of Big Red scared him so much that he stumbled back downhill, got up, ran into the trailer, and closed the door behind him. Now mind you, there's no phone line ran to that trailer, only power and some limited water. But for the rest of the night, he claimed that it stalked him. No matter where he was in that trailer, it scratched on the wall. Fitz figured the best thing to do was just not to respond and to hide in a corner. And when he didn't respond, it started messing with his car, beating on the side of it. And when he continued to ignore that, it cut the power line to the trailer. For the rest of the night, it just stayed outside, breathing, panting, growling. According to Fitz, it was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. Then, right before sunrise, it stops. Thinking to himself, screw this, I'm going home. He leaves out of the trailer with nothing on but his tank top, boxer shorts, and boots. Now outside, standing at his car, looking around, he sees nothing and starts to calm down. But just as Fitz is putting his hand on the door handle to open the car door, he hears a growl coming from down the road behind his vehicle. And looking in that direction about 50 yards away is Big Red on all fours climbing out of the ditch. And right there, according to Fitz, is when he got tired of all the crap and started shooting. Fitz told us that he took 7 shots at this monster, and he knew for sure that he hit it 3 times, and it did absolutely nothing. That's when he hopped in the vehicle, cranked up, and sped up to our house. Now, according to him, it stood there in the middle of the road and watched as he drove away. Now understand, Fitz is now at my kitchen table with me and my wife drinking coffee as he explains this to us. But as my wife and I explain to him our encounters with not only Big Red, but Mr. Hyde on the property, his eyes light up and you can see the sense of relief come over him, understanding that someone else experienced what he had and it meant that he wasn't crazy. Now, even though that conversation was able to calm Fitz's nerves a little bit, Big Red had scared the living snot out of him. And when his wife called 2 days later and told him he could come home, Fitz sped off my property. Now, this encounter not only marked the first time someone had taken a shot and hit one of these creatures, but also the beginning of the rumors about my property and my family. People started saying our land was cursed. Others started trespassing on the land looking for werewolves. Teenagers thought it was funny until they learned it was real. Now listen, I'm not a believer that these creatures hunt humans for food. In fact, I've seen evidence that support they'll eat deer and hog before they even go through the trouble of eating cattle. But what I do know is that they will kill a human. I know this very well from my family's own personal experience. But prior to us having one of our family members murdered by one of these animals, I found evidence on my property that led me to believe that as well. What evidence, you ask? Feces with human skin and personal items in it. Listen to me when I say this to you, that my family has been terrorized for years by these monsters. It brings you to a point where you have a unique understanding of their psychological makeup. Damn near understanding their wants, needs, and desires. Something that I would have never anticipated. And it's something that I definitely didn't want. It was thrusted on me and my family. So understand, this is just the beginning of me sharing with you our encounter. As I have said, we have livestock on our property. In all the years I've been keeping cows, I never once had a cow die of a heart attack. Now, I've lost cows because of prussic acid. Now, if you don't know what that means, it's a toxin that builds up in the leaves and grass from herbicides and pesticides. But that was my fault. I left a fence open, it wandered onto the backside of the property where I was treating the land. The 2 cows that I had die of heart attacks really threw me for a loop. This particular day, I head to the 4x4 because I had been keeping some cows in the back pasture. It was time for me to rotate them back towards the front. Upon arriving in the area, I noticed the craziest, oddest thing. Every cow that's back in that pasture, and it's fenced in, have their backs up against the fence. And in the middle of the field, there were 2 cows just laid out. Getting closer, I realized they're dead. So now I'm confused. Call the vet and have her come over, thinking that somehow the cows were poisoned. Thinking that I was going to need to move them back to the front pasture, which would screw up my rotations. Now, this vet I've been using for years, her name is Kelly. She comes over, takes a look, draws some blood, and says she'll run some tests and get back with me. I move the cows to the front pasture and realize again, something weird is going on. Because if you ever had cattle and you tried to herd them in a specific direction, it's a challenge. But when I opened the back gate, they flooded out of the back pasture, up the road, and I didn't have to coax not one of them to keep all. I should have known that it had something to do with these creatures that were passing on my property. 2 days later, Kelly calls me and tells me that the cows had a heart attack. And to be clear, she specifically told me that these cows did not have heart disease. According to Kelly, the cows had been scared to death. Now, asking her what could scare a cow in that manner, she says it would have to be a predator. But even then, she goes on to tell me that it would have to be sustained fear and terror in order to release the amount of hormones that it would take to give these animals a heart attack. And jokingly, Kelly goes on to say, maybe you have aliens on your property. But little did she know, something was roaming on my acreage. But it wasn't an alien. It didn't come from a spaceship. The only thing that I knew that could provoke that kind of fear was Mr. Hyde. Then, one Saturday morning, I'm up at 5 a.m. Just couldn't sleep. I get some coffee and decide I was going to get things together to head out at sunrise to clean the weeds over in our family cemetery and do a little maintenance. I fix myself some eggs, some bacon, grits, then make a sandwich for my wife, turn the oven on low and leave it there with a note saying, I love you, enjoy your breakfast, headed to the cemetery. 6 a.m. Now mind you, I'm aware of Mr. Hyde. I realize something just scared my cows to death, but mentally, blocking it out while I try to figure out how to deal with this whole thing. However, Mr. Hyde, wouldn't give me time to think about it or even to come to terms with the situation. He was in control, and I hadn't even realized it yet. So I'm in a truck headed to the cemetery, which is right off the dirt road that runs along the front side of my house. That road snakes into the woods about 500 yards. Then there's another trail just wide enough for a vehicle to drive down that leads to the cemetery. Now, this cemetery has been in my family since before I was born, going back to my great-great-grandfather. For me, it's a sacred place. Well, when I get there, all is well, so I get to work down on my hands and knees, clearing weeds. It's 17 graves out there, each with its own headstone. And just as a point of reference, for my entire life, I always felt watched when I was out there. Figured it was the spirits of my ancestors looking at me, nothing to it. So that feeling of being watched kicks in. It's early in the morning, the woods are kind of quiet, but they're not eerie. I'm moving in the direction of one of the graves towards the backside of the cemetery, which is close to the wood line, and start to smell urine. This particular grave is my great-grandfather's grave, and when I get there, it's got what has to be a 5-gallon bucket worth of urine all over his headstone. And we're talking about fresh urine. Then I hear movement in the trees, like something massive is moving away from me, but I can't see it. 5 minutes later, I hear the cows in that back pasture going crazy. So now I ride back down that trail, turn right, and head in that direction. And when I get to the pasture, they're all huddled up in the middle. And there he is, Mr. Hyde. The son of a bitch has broken my fence and trying to herd my cows out of the pasture and into the woods. Now imagine the scene. I'm sitting there in a truck. Now at that time, it never dawned on me, and I didn't understand that he probably heard me when I first cranked the truck up by the cemetery. But I'm inside the cab of the truck, fumbling around, windows rolled up, trying to load my shotgun. When I chamber around inside of the truck, he looks in my direction almost as if he heard it. Understand, this thing is 100 to 150 yards away from me, but he looks dead at me. Stepping out of the truck, my intentions is to fire a round in the air, and as soon as my foot hits the ground, he takes off running, clears the open portion of the pasture from where he's standing to the far back wood line in a good 6 to 8 seconds. We're talking about a distance of a solid 200 yards. Now pause right here in the story and let me explain something to you. When I tell you that Mr. Hyde is fast, when you compare his speed to the speed that I've seen Big Red running at, there is no comparison. Talk about being in denial and then reality sinking in. By the time both of my feet were on the ground and the shotgun was at ready, he's gone. Now, in a moment like that, several things start running through your mind. But one of the thoughts that stood out to me the most and still sticks with me to this day is, why did he run? You see, to me, this behavior was odd. It was just 2 weeks ago. This thing jumps out into the middle of the road like it's Superman. Now it's running. And honestly, in that moment, it gave me this false sense of hope, like I scared it. I did something. I was able to deal with it. And I'll admit to you, my ego kicked in. I'm standing there thinking, yeah, you're not so tough, you son of a bitch. But now I got a major problem. The fence that keeps my cows in the pasture, an entire 10-foot section of it, is broken and laid flat on the ground. So I hop in a truck, headed to the front side of the property to get some lumber to fix the fence. 20 minutes later, I done woke my brother up out of his sleep. We're getting wood, and looking towards the back side of the property, I see all of my cows stampeding into the front pasture. I want to be clear with you and make sure you understand. The front gate that they would have had to come through in order to get to the front side of the property was locked. Then you can hear this roar coming from back there where they were, and truthfully, the sound is probably like nothing any human has heard since the prehistoric ages. Looking at me, my brother says, "What the hell is that?" Understand, up until this point, I hadn't even told him about my encounter with Mr. Hyde on the road. I was hoping, praying, wishing that it was a one-off, that he would just move on and go on about his business. But coming to the realization that it seemed like this thing was going to stick around a while, I told him. And that was when he and I started plotting on how to get rid of Mr. Hyde. Something that to this day, we haven't been able to accomplish. Over the years, we've had over 40 dogs on our property, and none more beloved than our favorite, General Patton. You see, he got that name as a pup, because even as a puppy, with his smaller size, he didn't take crap from any of the other dogs. Patton was a Doberman Pinscher, and as a pup, Kelly put him on steroids for some breathing issues that he had. Those steroids originally made him bigger, stronger, more dominant, and more aggressive than the rest of the dogs on our homestead. Now let me pause right here for a moment and give you a warning. Before I tell you what happened between him and Mr. Hyde, understand that we don't treat our dogs as children. We have real children. Our dogs are used for work, killing coyotes, protecting the property. Again, dogs aren't human beings. And I'm not sure when or how the world was convinced that they are, but they're not. Dogs don't need strollers. They have 4 legs to walk. Anyway, at the time when Mr. Hyde and General Patton started the game of cat and mouse, we had 4 other dogs. And it all started on a warm summer's evening. My wife and I had just gotten home from a wedding, one of those country folk shotgun weddings. The girl ended up getting pregnant and the 2 kids got married in the kitchen of her parents' house. Anyway, my wife and I get home, and normally when we drive up to the house, the dogs come running out barking to greet us. Well, we pull up and there are no dogs. I didn't think anything of it, but she pointed out that that was strange. So now, we're getting out of the truck, she's headed into the front door, and I'm going around the side of the house looking for the dogs. And when I get to the right side of the house, there's a blood trail leading under the structure. Down on my hands and knees, taking a look, one of our German shepherds named Butch is dead. He has lacerations down his spine so deep that you can see the bone. The other 3 dogs who are hiding under there see me, and no matter how much I call them, they will not move. I was still down on my hands and my knees when I hear barking and growling coming from up in the woods. Now, observing my dog's reactions, Butch's body, I don't suspect it's one of these creatures that did this. I'm 100% confident that it's one of them that did this. So now I run into the house, get the shotgun, head out the back door and into the woods, where I find General Patton barking and growling, going absolutely nuts. But scanning the woods with my eyes, I can't see what he's barking at. Now, my hand is on his collar. I'm pulling him out of the woods. And when we get back up to the house, he goes straight to where the rest of the dogs are hiding and starts barking like he's talking to them, telling them to come out. Now, sure enough, before I go inside, all of the dogs have come out of the house and are hanging around the back door. And as I tell you the story, I cannot stress to you enough that these are farm dogs. That behavior is so far out the norm of how my dogs would normally react and behave that it's damn near frightening. You see, farm dogs tend to roam, move around, do whatever the hell they want to do until you call them. And what I found to be even more strange, I'm going inside the house, got a giant black garbage bag, headed out of the back door. Crossing the threshold, I literally have to jump over the dogs, land on the back porch, and then head down the stairs. And the only dog that follows me down those steps is General Patton. And he was there right by my side as I extracted Butch from under the house, put him in a bag, then took him over to the family cemetery and buried him. Now, that night, I'm expecting things to go nuts, but it's quiet, almost too quiet. And over time, I learned this lesson about Mr. Hyde. You see, that was his MO. When you think he's going to mess with you, he doesn't. He loves to catch you off guard. 2 days later, my wife goes out with her sister. I'm home alone and the dogs are just barking, growling, going crazy. I look out of the window and all the other dogs have General Patton surrounded, growling, barking, nipping at him. I'm there looking out of the window saying to myself, what the hell is going on? And for the record, this type of behavior I've never seen in any of my dogs until Mr. Hyde started coming around. It was like they all decided that they were going to turn on him. So now I'm outside with a stick trying to separate these dogs, and they turn on me, growling, barking, closing in. The whole time, General Patton is by my side. And listen to me when I tell you, these dogs turned so aggressive towards me that I slowly backed up, went inside my house, and got my shotgun. And when I reemerged out of the back door, they went even more crazy. And I remember saying, I don't know what the hell has gotten into y'all, but I'm finna start having to dig some more graves around here if you don't calm down. Then I fire my shotgun into the air, the dogs flinch, and then you can hear this growling roar come from deep in my woods. And all of them take off running, except for General Patton. Now, as you can tell by the story, I'm not a man that uses much foul language. But right then and there, I found myself standing, peering off into the woods, and saying to myself, what the fuck is going on? Patton is right there looking at me. And I swear to you, if that dog could talk, he was saying to me that the rest of these dogs had lost their damn minds. Then he turns and walks into the house. Now pause right here in the story for a moment and let me explain something else to you. Up to this point, for 10 years, I had never kept a dog inside of my house. But from that day on, Patton has been and always will be the only dog allowed in our house. And as I tell you the rest of the story, you will understand why. You see, he earned the right to live inside, in my opinion. Because over the next week, the other dogs were just gone. Every now and then you can hear them barking way off in the distance. Majority of the time it was coming from over in the swampland area of our property. Then, one morning, my wife is outside bringing in groceries from the store. I'm in the kitchen, and General Patton starts sniffing, pacing back and forth. Now, the front door is closed. She done made 2 trips into the house. I'm standing there, one hand on the counter, leaning, lifting my legs, sliding my feet into the boots, go outside and help her with the rest of the groceries. When Patton takes off barking, gets to the front door, realizes it's closed, and then takes off into the living room. And this dog jumps through one of our screen windows. I knew it was trouble. And that's when I hear my wife scream. Next, you can hear her feet running across the porch, headed to the front door. So I meet her at the front door, shotgun in hand. And my beautiful wife flies past me, brushing my shoulder, saying, "It's out there! It's out there!" Now visualize this so you can understand what I'm saying to you. When you walk out of my front door, across the porch and down the steps, you walk straight out onto a little dirt road. My wife's car is parked right there in front of the house. On the other side of that dirt road is this huge clump of trees. Well, Patton is on the other side of a vehicle. He's put himself between her and Mr. Hyde. And that monster is there in that little mess of trees, looking down on Patton with this murderous expression like, "You bastard, I'm going to kill you." And as I sit here telling you this story, looking back on that moment then, right now in the present, and this was the first time I shot Mr. Hyde myself. 12 gauge shotgun raised to the ready, I fire 5 slugs dead at him. And when I sit here and tell you that Mr. Hyde didn't like that at all, oh boy, he lets out this damn roar, and I swear it was something straight out of a King Kong movie. Now, I'm not sure if this was the first time he was shot, but his reaction was vaguely human. You see this look of shock come across his face. Then he begins to touch his chest and shoulders, like the pain from those slugs had just registered in his body. And clearly, after that pain had registered, his emotions turned to anger, because that's when he roared. And what I found most frightening and shocking about this encounter was that he decided to leave. Now, like I've said, I listened to a hell of a lot of Dogman Encounters, interviews, and stories as we decided who our family was going to share our story with. And normally, people completely overlook what I'm about to explain to you. The conversation turns to, this type of rifle will kill them, or this type of gun will hurt them, or you need this type of bullet. And I understand from an armchair's quarterback perspective, that's important stuff to talk about. But for me and my family, the most significant and frightening thing was that it decided to leave. And one of the most overlooked aspects of the Dogman topic is that these animals are a hell of a lot like you and me. They have reasoning skills above the average domesticated animal. Again, it's damn near human-like. They make choices. When presented with harm, Mr. Hyde decided to retreat and go the other way. Now, another small tidbit from my encounters with Mr. Hyde. Just because he leaves doesn't mean he's gone. You see what I've learned? He's a master when it comes to tactics. So now, he's done backed off. I get General Patton and head back into the house. But Mr. Hyde has my wife in a huff. She's never ever been afraid of anything on her own property and is pissed, demanding that I do something about it. But back then, I just didn't know what to do. You see, later that night, Mr. Hyde takes revenge. And by revenge, I mean doing something so sadistical, so psychotic, that it scared me and General Patton to our core. It's 11 p.m. My wife and I are in the kitchen cleaning it up, and Patton starts to bark, walking around the house, giving his warning bark. Not aggressive, just a constant bark, moving from room to room, like he was saying to somebody outside the house, I know you're there. We stand there and watch him as he goes from bedroom to bedroom to bedroom, then moves to the front door, retreats from the front door, moves by the front windows of the house, then stops. And 10 minutes later, he starts to whimper and whine at the front door like he has to pee. So I grab my shotgun, open the front door and let him out, but he takes off running up the road away from the house. Imagine this, if you will, him running out into the darkness, me standing at the threshold, the light from the house at my back, complete and total utter darkness in front of me, knowing, understanding that Mr. Hyde is somewhere out there, and me trying to decide if I'm going to follow General Patton, my most loyal dog. And when I made the decision to close that front door behind me and step out into that darkness, I had absolutely no clue what General Patton was leading me to. 2 minutes later, I find myself standing in front of the barbed wire fence that runs around the front pasture. And there they were, the other 3 dogs, necks broken, bodies tossed along that barbed wire fence, equally spaced 15 to 20 feet apart. Now, if you've ever doubted the intelligence of a dog, I want you to pause right here for a moment and think. I, as a human being, understood what that meant. And looking at General Patton, I believe he knew as well, because he starts to panic, moving around frantically, looking at me like, what should we do? But there was nothing that could be done. So I head back to the house, call my brother, and he and I go out and take the dogs off the fence, wrap them in black garbage bags, and leave them in the back of the truck so we can bury them the next morning. After that, it goes quiet for the rest of what I've come to call Dogman season. Now, truthfully, I'm not sure if Mr. Hyde was injured from me shooting him, or he had just decided to make that point by killing those dogs and decided to leave. But the next time he popped up, he was on a warpath. And this time, General Patton didn't stand a chance. But he tried, I swear. That dog gave it his all, defiant to the very end. And for me personally, outside of losing one of my family members to Mr. Hyde, the second greatest loss was the day that he took General Patton's life.